And you're back listening to Talking Law with Despina Priala. And like you heard just before the break there, we're talking about this one law firm representing both parties, which to me, as soon as you sent us this story, Despina, I thought that can't be fair.
Can you do that?
It makes no sense. So Despina, is it ethical? Is it the right thing to do? Is it legal? I don't get it.
So this article was in relation to a lady, I believe in Queensland, yes, I think up North Queensland, who was represented by a solicitor who happened to also represent the other party in a conveyance. And, you know, of all the matters that you would not act for both parties, this is one of them. But my personal view, before going into it a little bit in detail with this story, absolutely not. I mean, you cannot, in my view, act for both parties and represent each party in a transaction in the best interest of your client.
Yep.
And logic says you can't, particularly in a conveyance where anything can go wrong. I mean, at any stage, and you've got each party making decisions along the way about whether they should go unconditional. Is there are there issues with the property? Are there building defects? And then you've got to negotiate with the other side. Then you've got to get to settlement. Then you've got issues of maybe we need an extension. I mean, how could you possibly have the one firm acting for both parties? So I am absolutely against it, and I don't do it. And I think it's wrong. As to whether it's ethical, of course, that's another question. And how is it legal? Also, which came out in the story.
Yep. And well, it is legal, isn't it? You could do it. They're not breaking the law by doing this.
Weird.
So, yes. So technically, we want to talk about the Australian Solicitors Conduct Rules, and all lawyers are subject to that, and each state and territory. And in Queensland, we have a particular rule, Rule 11, and it talks about conflicts of interest particularly. And these conduct rules are there as rules for solicitors to abide by. And whether a solicitor breaches a rule is always a question of fact, depending on the circumstances. But they're there as a tool and a reference and a guidance for solicitors to really comply with them. And they're very important rules. And Rule 11 talks about conflicts of interest. So you can imagine if you're acting for both parties in a transaction, if you're considering or contemplating that as a lawyer, you have to say, oh, well, there's definitely potential for a conflict of interest. It might not be in existence as at the time that you're engaged, right? But it could certainly come up, during the transaction, particularly in a conveyance, because, as I said, anything can go wrong. And what Rule 11 says in Queensland, and there are similar rules in other states, is that a solicitor can act for two or more parties in a transaction, but they've got to jump through a couple of hoops. So one of them is that all of the parties are aware of it. So, for example, I couldn't act for a party and not tell the other party. Obviously, everyone's got to be on the same page and understand, do you all understand and are aware that I would be acting for both parties? And then the second part is that those parties give informed consent. And I think those are the critical words. And when I read this story, from what I got from this story, which is published by the ABC, and I presume there's mostly truth to it, this particular lady talked about, and it was in Mackay actually, talked about, well, I didn't really understand what it meant when I gave my consent. So that was a real issue. So perhaps it wasn't properly explained to her that if you give your consent to your lawyer to say, yes, you can act for me, and by the way, yes, you can act for the other party, do you know what that means when you give that consent? That's really important. And that's up to the solicitor to advise the clients of the potential risks of consenting to that solicitor acting for both parties. And it's all very well for the paperwork and all the documentation to say, look, if there ever is a conflict of interest that might arise, then the solicitor will back out and get someone else. But that's a very impractical thing to have happen when you suddenly might be in dispute with the other party and you go, oh, well, now I can't act, so you better go get someone else. Well, that's extra time, money for those parties involved.
During the transaction, yeah.
So aren't you better off not acting for both? And I think that whilst it is allowed, right, it is frowned upon by the Queensland Law Society. It's not something that they, readily jump at and accept. And it's not outlawed either. So it is up to the solicitor involved to make the right decision, to give those clients proper information to make an informed consent if a situation arises. But I think the real issue is that the solicitors at the beginning, at the outset, should just say no. Because putting up that Chinese wall, particularly in large firms that have been known to do that, right? Where you put up that Chinese wall where the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, sounds all good in theory, but in practice, I don't think it really works that well. You could be, inadvertently hearing confidential information in the tea room, or near the photocopier machine, and it just is out there then. And then what do you do with that information? You've got duties owed to your client. I think it's wrought with a lot of danger and risk, and I wouldn't do it, and I don't think other solicitors should. And unfortunately for this lady, yes, it was to her peril, I believe. So, yes, if you have a solicitor that says I can act for both, that's a big red flag in my book.
Be careful before you sign the dotted line. Thank you so much again, Despina. If anyone does want to get in touch with you directly about a legal question, where can they go?
They can phone the office 55291 294, email info@prialalegal.com.au, and I'll have this up on YouTube again at the end of the week. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, then you get all of the shows as they're posted.
Love it. Thank you so much, Despina and Wayne.
And we'll see you next week.
See you then, guys.
Are you confused about legal jargon? Do you need legal advice but don't know where to turn? Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97. Despina, a leading lawyer with over 20 years of experience, will demystify the law and provide practical advice to help you navigate legal issues. Whether it's a family matter, a property dispute, or a business concern, Talking Law has got you covered. Don't miss out on this valuable resource. Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97.